What's up, everybody? Good afternoon. I'm a floating head once again, and now I want to talk about these last couple of weeks from the opposite perspective, which is the draft. I want to talk about our picks, and I want to talk about what our selection of draft picks is probably going to look like come April. So, I'm not talking about our picks because it looks like we are going to make the playoffs. We have good odds to make the playoffs right now, at least. And if we do make the playoffs, we're going to be picking in the very late teens or in the 20s. And there's really not much to discuss there until the Seahawks are actually eliminated. But do want to talk about the Seahawks' third round pick that they gained in last year's draft. If you will remember, we traded one of our picks to the Broncos last year, um, in exchange for their third round pick last year plus a third round pick this year. So we're going to be talking about that third round pick. Now, I already made a video about this before the season started, but to lay everything out on the table once again, because I think there's still some confusion here, the Seahawks made a trade with the Broncos that gives them one of two things: either the third round pick of the Broncos or the third round pick of the Saints. Because remember, the Saints gave a third round pick to the Broncos as part of the Sean Payton trade. So it was agreed on that we would get whatever pick is lesser of those two third round picks. So basically, we needed both teams to be kind of bad this year for that pick to be good. Now again, it's a third round pick. It's not a first round pick. It's not something that is extremely valuable. It's just kind of nice and it's something to keep in mind. But the difference between a high pick in the third round and a low pick in the third round is not that big. However, I would rather be picking high in the third than low in the third. It is objectively better. So I was keeping an eye on things as the year went on. And as of today, going into week 17, I can happily report that we got the scenario that we needed. Neither of those two teams are terrible, the Broncos and the Saints, but they're both not good. And as of right now, they are both very unlikely to make the playoffs. If you go to the NYT tracker here, you can see the Broncos have a 6% chance after blowing that New England game, and the Saints, after losing that game to the Rams on Thursday Night Football, are at 12%. So you combine those two, you have 18%. So there's an 18% chance that one of these two teams make the playoffs. So the rest of the time, we're getting a pretty good third rounder. So it's becoming relatively safe to assume neither of these teams will make the playoffs, which guarantees our pick is going to fall somewhere in that top 18 of the third round. So top half approximately, which is pretty nice because when we made that trade, the clear most likely scenario was that, oh, the Broncos are going to be bad because they're still recovering from Hurricane Hackett and they still have a lot of work to do even after getting Sean Payton. But the Saints were probably going to win that division because it was such a bad division, they'd win it by default, and not happening. In fact, they are on the cusp of blowing their division. They could recover it with a win this weekend, but as you can see, even that would not guarantee that they're good. They would still have to beat the Bucks on tiebreakers in all likelihood. So yeah, we actually got the good scenario where both teams are just kind of whatever. Both teams are not good enough to drive that pick down. So if you go to Tankathon right now, let's try to figure this out because this is where it gets really confusing. As of this moment, as of the end of week 16, the Saints' first round pick is 11th, and the Broncos' pick is 14th. So both teams have the same record, but the Saints have a much weaker strength of schedule. So right now we would be getting that Denver pick, right? We would be getting the pick that is natively from Denver because it's lower. Again, whatever pick is lower is the one that we get. So we would be in this 14 slot. However, the NFL draft rotates teams that have the same record as they go through the draft. Let's go back to this page on Tankathon here, which shows you the full draft order for every team as of right now. you can see that Washington is currently picking ahead of New England in the first round. Washington's 3, New England's 4. And then in the second round, it flips. New England picks third, Washington picks fourth. So the NFL utilizes this rotation to try to make it a little bit more even in terms of draft equity for these teams that have the same record and are tie broken by percentage points on a schedule. So while the Seahawks theoretically would have the 14th pick in the third round, it doesn't actually work out quite like that. In fact, Tankathon makes it pretty easy. They will tell you, as of right now, exactly where Seattle's pick is if the season ended today. 79th overall. If the season ended today, we would get the 79th overall pick as part of the trade last season. So, all in all, pretty good. But what could boost that? What could drive that pick up just a little bit higher? Most obviously, the Saints and the Broncos continuing to lose. The Broncos play the Chargers and the Raiders to end the season. Sounds to me like a recipe for going 1-1. They're going to beat the Chargers. The Chargers playing backup quarterbacks. They have a interim no-name coach. Shouldn't stand much of a chance against a team that is even moderately well coached, which I think Denver on the whole is, despite what we saw on Sunday. But they'll probably lose to the Raiders. The Raiders are playing really good lately. They're playing motivated for Antonio Pierce, and I think they're just a little bit of a better team, just in general right now. So Broncos probably going to go 1-1, which will help out a little bit. The Saints, they are very likely, I don't want to say very likely, but they have a very good chance of being eliminated this weekend if they lose to the Buccaneers. And I think that they will. And if they lose that game, they're done. I don't think there's any way for them to get in if they lose that game. So the Saints may have nothing to play for in Week 18. Of course, the Falcons are likely to have nothing to play for in that game either, so maybe both teams play backups. I don't know. If the Saints do go for it, if the Saints do actually try to win that game, I imagine they probably could. So what I'm trying to say is, looks like another 8-9 to me. So if both teams go 8-9, the issue is, if you look at who is right ahead of us on this pick order, you can see that it's Atlanta. And Atlanta, they have to play the Saints. So if the Saints beat them, then that's obviously going to knock their pick even higher. And then the Falcons are also playing the Bears, who I think will beat the Falcons. So the Falcons' pick is only going to go up if they lose out, compared to a team like the Saints going 1-1. And then you have a team like the Vikings, who we want to go 1-1 too. So their pick is currently ranked ahead. So if the Saints and Broncos both go 1-1, which is what I would predict as of right now, then I think we are looking at a scenario where this pick doesn't really move all that much. So if we want it to move, we would want both the Broncos and the Saints to lose out, which, I mean, I guess it could happen. Like, Denver could be completely deflated after blowing that Sunday night game against New England, and the Saints could be completely deflated after having a season that they thought was basically guaranteed to be end in the playoffs, end in Week 17. So if that happened, then that would potentially drive their pick ahead of teams like the Raiders, ahead of teams like the Packers, ahead of teams like the Bears, because I think the Bears are going to win at least one of their last couple games here. And it could bump up to maybe like 70, 76. But I don't think it can really get much higher than that. I think that's pretty much the best case scenario here. There was a moment in the season where it looked like both teams were going to be awful, but it was never realistically going to hold. We were always probably looking at a scenario where at least one of the teams would be okay. As it turns out, both teams are okay, but neither team's actually good. So this is pretty much set in stone here. The only thing that could really turn over our apple cart, so to speak, would be if the Saints beat the Bucks and get into the playoffs. Which, by the way, I think they're hosed on tiebreakers. So even if they beat the Bucks, there's a very good chance they don't get in because they keep losing divisional games. So I don't think that guarantees anything, but that is the one realistic possibility that could flip over our apple cart here a little bit. Again, it's not that big of a deal, but we may as well pretend like it's a big deal because it's better than nothing. The Broncos, their playoff odds are so thin. It's a lottery ticket at this point. I don't think that's a real possibility. But the Saints, yeah, that could happen. Okay, so that's a rundown on our third round pick. Once again, we get whichever pick is the lesser value of the two between the third round pick from the Broncos and third round pick from the Saints. As of right now, I mean, the pick natively comes from the Saints, but the Broncos own it because they got it in the Sean Payton trade, and they're going to pay it forward to us if it's lower than their own native pick. I know that's very confusing, but for us, the only thing that matters is that one pick natively belongs to the Broncos and the other native pick belongs to the Saints. That's the only thing that really counts here. So I would probably go ahead and sign off on that as a pretty successful trade. Neither team was good enough to make that pick really low, and I don't think there was anything going on with that third round pick when we traded it to Denver that I'm really like sad about. Like probably one or two players, right? But I think Denver used that pick on Riley Moss, who does he even play that much? Not really. He's not really doing much for them yet. And I don't feel like we missed out on anything painful by making that trade down. Couple of players, of course, but it's always going to be a couple players. It's probably going to be a little juicier to look at this upcoming draft in that third round area and realize who we're getting now because we made that trade. All right. Hope that made sense. See you guys later. Go Hawks. Seahawks made a pretty decent trade. Not a blockbuster trade, not a huge win, but I would definitely sign off on this one as a win. We can make it a little bit better with getting some good results over the next 2 weeks. See you guys later. Go Hawks.